Hello, my name is Lisa de Garston, one of the Business Development Directors for Prism Brain Mapping. I would like to welcome you to this video, The Brains Behind Coaching, where I will explore the link between neuroscience and coaching and how Prism can help you in your coaching. So a quick overview of today's video, which is loosely split into three sections. Firstly, there is a theoretical piece exploring the brains behind coaching, the connections between coaching and neuroscience. Secondly, we would look at how these concepts play out on a sample Prism map. Bear in mind, a coaching session using the Prism map could normally be a couple of hours, so this is very much an introduction to Prism and does not explore the whole map in detail. Thirdly, in the last section, I will be joined by my colleague Alex Eade. Alex has over 20 years' experience in coaching, change management, leadership and team development. Alex is one of the main points of contact for accredited Prism practitioners, and I will be asking him some questions about using Prism in coaching. So let's get started by watching Open Your Mind, an introduction to the wonder that is the human brain. I hope that has given you a great insight into how amazing and powerful our brains are. We know more about our brain and its functionality than ever before, and the one thing all neuroscientists agree on is there is so much more we can learn. Your brain is quite simply the most complex entity in the universe, But fortunately, you don't need to be a neuroscientist to understand the functional workings of the brain. There are some very simplistic principles that help us recognise why a brain-based approach to coaching can be so valuable, and how, as a coach, you can tap into this knowledge to better deliver coaching initiatives. The quote will, I'm sure, resonate with many of you, so let's spend a few minutes looking at what this thing called coaching actually is and how it has evolved. The word coaching is fast becoming the latest business buzzword and is used relentlessly by people at all levels. But how many of these people could explain what coaching actually is? The word coaching is an interesting one. The term coach traces its origins to the Hungarian word kokski, meaning carriage, a method of carrying you from one place to another. As a term for development, it seems to have first arisen in Oxford around 200 years ago, as slang for tutors who were carrying their well-heeled but often not very bright students through their exams. Sometime around 1830, the word became linked more with sporting prowess than intellect. The man most associated with kick-starting what we now think of as modern coaching was a certain Benjamin Carter, football coach turned motivational speaker in the early 1980s. Although very little is known about Mr. Carter, life coaching quickly became recognised and deserving of professional status in America, although it was the best part of a decade before it received similar recognition in the UK. So keeping in mind that coaching means carrying you from where you are to where you want to go, let's look at a favourite definition. The art of facilitating the performance, motivation and development of another. This is from Miles Downey's book, Effective Coaching. The message here is a good one, and I think our first link to neuroscience. The art of coaching is not about order, process or control. The art of coaching interprets people as imaginative, evolving, living organisms, not machines or robots. The art of coaching embraces the complexity of the brain and recognises that in order to facilitate a change, two complex organisms, yours and your coachee's, must work together effectively. And as neuroscience research discovers more and more about how our brains work, coaches can use this knowledge to help their clients not only bring about desirable change, but also to help their clients understand why they behave in certain ways. So why should you be interested in neuroscience as a coach? From a coaching perspective, our current understanding of neuroscience reinforces what we already know. Coaching is about change. The fundamental task of all coaching is to provide a context for change. That is true whether the coach is an external coach, an internal coach, a manager, or you are just having an ad hoc coaching conversation. Helping people change is important because, as we have seen so graphically in the last year or so, both personal and work life can and does change rapidly. Change, however, is not easy due to the way that our brains are wired. Unfortunately, we tend to get more rather than less set in our ways as we get older. Neuroscience supports this understanding and explains why old habits are hard to break and new habits are hard to form. Let's explore this further. To execute a task or a behaviour, our brain first breaks it down into its component parts, with each part then being stored away. These parts are associated with each other by our brain stringing together a line of neurons to form what's called a neural pathway. Neurons are perhaps best considered as nerve cells, the fundamental units of the brain responsible for receiving information from the external world, for sending motor commands to our muscles, and for transforming and relaying signals at every step in between. The more you execute a behaviour, the stronger the neural pathway becomes, and so too does your ability to execute these actions, to the point where they become habitual and use only the unconscious parts of your brain. In other words, these actions become so deeply ingrained that these habits are now completed without you having to think about it. It is interesting to consider why the brain creates habits. When you're trying to break a bad habit, Just the word habit can develop a nasty connotation, but this isn't necessarily the case. Imagine what your life would be like without habits. The very process of getting out of bed in the morning and getting ready for work would leave you utterly exhausted, and you would be overwhelmed before you even stepped out of the door. Habits allow us to perform mundane tasks without even thinking about them, leaving the brain free to focus on more important matters instead of figuring out how to work a toothbrush in the morning. Yet as beneficial or enjoyable as habits can be, once a habit has become ingrained, it may seem impossible to break. And yet breaking a bad habit can truly change your life for the better. Understanding these neural pathways is at the root of why change can be so difficult. So it's worth considering it more. One of the best analogies is to think of neural pathways as different types of roads. Initially, the pathway through this forest is quite slow and arduous. The path is nothing more than a track and weaves in and out of the undergrowth and trees. However, over time we discover better routes through the forest and the passage is easier. As the pathway becomes used more and more, the path is developed into a road, and the road eventually into a motorway. The smaller, less used neural pathways are like the forest tracks carrying traffic slowly and awkwardly. The stronger, more used neural pathways are like a vast multi-lane motorway carrying traffic quickly and efficiently. The brain much prefers the motorways and uses these in preference to the forest tracks. From the brain's perspective, it simply uses less energy to travel on a motorway. In coaching, we want to help people create new neural pathways for new behaviours. But it's not easy because you're often working with motorways in the brain. With this in mind, it may be that it is far more effective to focus on creating new positive behaviours than stopping old negative ones. After all, if the motorway pathway doesn't get used as much because you're going in a different direction, it will eventually become less and less strong and over time may even die off completely from lack of use. And the new pathway will continue to get stronger each time it is used. When it comes to change, luckily we have something on our side. The brain has one extraordinary property that is absolutely critical for change, and it's called neuroplasticity. This excerpt from a video called What is Neuroplasticity, voiced by Dr. Matthew Antonucci from the Plasticity Brain Centers in Orlando, Florida, gives us a simple yet effective explanation of what neuroplasticity actually means.
Neuroplasticity. You hear the term very often these days from smartphone apps, learning centers, rehabilitation centers, and even through athletic performance. But what does the term really mean? Well, let's keep things simple. If you break down the term neuro, means nervous system, which consists of the brain, spinal cord, and all the nerves that send and receive information to and from the brain. And plasticity, which comes from the Greek word plastos, meaning moldable. So together, neuroplasticity means a moldable brain. Originally introduced by an Italian psychiatrist by the name of Ernesto Lugaro in 1906, the term neuroplasticity was a way to describe how the brain can change throughout life to adapt, learn, and even recover from brain injury. But this wasn't the first time that the concept of neuroplasticity was described. You may be familiar with the famous experiment in 1904 conducted by a Russian psychologist, Ivan Pavlov. Professor Pavlov was able to essentially rewire the brains of his dogs to salivate at the ringing of a bell. He did this by repetitively ringing a bell every single time their food was presented to them. You probably have personal experience with neuroplasticity and don't even know it. As a matter of fact, every time we learn something new, we are harnessing the power of neuronal plasticity. You may remember when you were back in grade school, your teacher told you at the end of the week you were going to have a quiz on all 50 capitals of the United States. At the time, you probably could recall 2, maybe 3 of the capitals of the United States, but how are you going to learn all 50? The chances are you probably went home and sat down with your parents and created a deck of flashcards with the state on one side and the capital of the state on the opposite side. You probably looked at the state and then read the capital. You did this over and over and over again until you were able to call the capital as soon as you saw the name of the state. So what do you and Pavlov's dogs have in common? Each of you have both experienced the benefits of neuroplasticity. You are both exposed to a stimulus, accurately, with enough repetition and intensity to rewire brain function. So essentially, neuroplasticity can be considered as learning. And what's the expression? An old dog can always learn new tricks. Neuroplasticity takes place every single day of our life, regardless of our age or health. As long as you're alive, your brain will make new connections, and you can increase its performance and health. Neuroplasticity doesn't just apply to cognitive skills, it also applies to physical skills. Don't believe us? Do you remember the first time you tried to ride a bicycle? You may have attempted to ride a bike with training wheels, then once you had practiced enough, you may have removed the training wheels and then were able to ride the bike. The process of learning to ride a bike is a physical process, and just like learning information, it requires repetition and intensity.
So we know that our brains are not hardwired from birth. As we change, neural pathways carve out new roads, and this process literally changes the very architecture of our brains. So as we change, we are physically sculpting the shape of our minds. In fact, the information you are taking in today will be changing your brain as you mentally process what you see and hear. Food for thought indeed. And yes, in many instances, change may be difficult, but the brain's extraordinary properties make it possible. Our understanding of neuroplasticity is fundamental to how we change and one of the key principles underpinning PRISM. A further important part of change is the influence of emotion. Neuroscience shows that our brains are built to detect changes in our environment and are more sensitive to negative change. Negative events have a greater impact on our brains than positive ones. This is referred to as negative bias and can have a powerful effect on our behaviour. So why do we have this negative bias? Our tendency to pay more attention to bad things and overlook good things is likely a result of evolution. Early in human history, paying attention to bad, dangerous and negative threats was literally a matter of life and death. Those who were more in tune to danger and who paid more attention to the bad things around them were more likely to survive. Of course, this survival of the fittest also meant they were more likely to hand down the genes that made them more attentive to danger, hence why we still have them today. This perspective suggests that this tendency to dwell on the negative more than the positive is simply one way the brain tries to keep us safe. And whilst we no longer have to combat saber-toothed tigers or avoid disaster in the same way as our ancestors, the amygdala, the survival part of the brain, looks for potential danger 6 times a second. That's an incredible 21,000 times an hour. The impact of negative bias is easy to see. Ever found yourself dwelling on an insult or fixating on your mistakes? Criticisms often have a greater impact than compliments, and bad news frequently draws more attention than good. As humans, we tend to remember traumatic experiences better than positive ones, recall insults better than praise, react more strongly to negative stimuli, think about negative things more frequently than positive ones, respond more strongly to negative events than to equally positive ones. So how do we overcome negative bias? The first step is recognising that negativity drives an emotion. So to understand negative bias, we first need to understand emotions. We shouldn't look at emotions as needing to be controlled and contained. Rather, we should understand them and make better use of what they tell us. We need to prompt discussions about feelings so we can add this emotional component and understand where negative bias may be having an impact. For change to occur, we need to encourage people to think about the situation rationally and logically. But if they ignore the emotion, we are then missing vital information. Where there is resistance to change, it is rarely because of a missing thought process. It will almost certainly be because we are missing the underpinning emotion. Negative bias can have a powerful impact on behaviour, but being aware of it means that you can take steps to coach to a more positive outlook. Our understanding of neuroscience shows that in contrast to negative bias, there is positive emotional response in the brain when people participate in engaging learning activities. The pleasure of learning increases the brain's release of dopamine. Dopamine plays a key role in how we feel pleasure. It helps us strive, focus, and find things interesting. In addition, we know that the brain may become overloaded during stressful periods and impede the processing and storage of information. Thus, learning is more difficult when we're experiencing anxiety. The brain will not register rewards for new changes if there is high anxiety. We all know it is not always easy to tell people who are opposed to emotions being part of the conversation that they need to be in touch with their emotions. Neuroscience can help provide more acceptable language. As a coach, you may say, when you're trying to make a change, your brain has to assess the pros and cons of your decision. Before you act, your brain does a quick calculation, but it relies on more than just your rational thinking to do this. It will also rely on your emotions. So, we need to consider how you would feel if you were making this change. This type of conversation will add the emotional component to their analysis more readily and will move them closer to change. So, in summary, the basic neuroscience principles related to change are as follows. Old habits require less energy. New habits require more brain processing and therefore more energy. For change to occur, the new process has to be embedded. The brain will tend to remember things that are reinforced in an emotional context. And the brain will not register rewards for the new changes if there is high anxiety. Neuroscience has another major contribution to make to coaching: understanding why we are the way we are. This quote from Professor John Ratey is key to who we are and how we have developed. Most of who we are is the result of the interaction of our genes and our experiences. In some cases, the genes are more important, while in others, the environment is more crucial. It is not a matter of either or, it is part of the ongoing debate over nature and nurture. In effect, both have key roles to play in our behaviour. For a long time, scientists believed that about 60% of our behaviour was inherited, genetic, and the rest we acquired through our experiences of life. More recent research now shows that the genetic figure was too high, and in fact it's probably better to regard it as a 50-50 balance. From the moment we are born, or indeed technically before we are born, we start interacting with our world. That initial interaction is very intense because the brain is developing at a phenomenal rate, initially to cope with the immediate post-birth world, but then to survive and develop to cope with a lifetime of challenges. In babies, as many as 50,000 brain cells are formed every second. From our earliest moments of life, we experience the world through our senses, and we respond to the world through what we call behaviour. Gradually, we develop behavioural preferences, and we use those frequently to meet our needs. However, we also have low preferences for other behaviours, which we tend to use only when we really need to. It is important to note that even though our inherited genetic behaviour remains fairly constant, the behaviour we develop as a result of our experiences will continue to change throughout our life. This is critically important. Firstly, because it supports the fact that change is possible and it's never too late to change. And secondly, because it shows without a shadow of a doubt that we are unique. We are all unique products of both our genes, nature, and our environment, nurture. This informs coaching in a couple of ways. Firstly, it reinforces that a directive approach is not useful. When we tell someone, we are imposing our own preference and viewpoint. This may not fit or be the most empowering. When we tell someone, this is a product of our liking and is processed according to our behavioural preferences. The solution best suited to us is not necessarily best suited for the person we are coaching. Secondly, if we're all different, then a lot of the success we have as a coach, and indeed in life, is due to our ability to understand ourselves and others better. Everyone has their own unique and distinct preferences. When you customize and align your output with another's input, you increase the probability for greater rapport and understanding. You are literally on the same wavelength. This neuroscience principle has enormous implications in all human relationships, but especially in coaching. The more we know about ourselves and the coachee, the better place we are to overcome the influence that our own preferences may be having. People unaware of individual behaviour preferences typically coach others with the unconscious intent of creating a mirror image of themselves. Entering into a coaching conversation with such misconceptions sets the stage for at best ineffective coaching and at worst hostile encounter. Adapting behaviour is crucial to effective coaching. Behaviour is important because everything we do, how we influence, how we impact on others, the roles we excel in, and how we lead and manage others is down to our behaviour. As a first step, coaches must become aware of their own behavioural preferences, and secondly, understand the person they are coaching, and thirdly, help them understand themselves better. So let's reflect on these key neuroscience principles that underpin PRISM. Firstly, we are all different. We all see the world in different ways. Every human being that has ever lived or ever will live is unique. You are truly one of a kind. We know from our understanding of the brain that behaviour is created by a combination of nature and nurture, an exclusive combination unique to you. PRISM therefore does not label people or try to fit them into boxes. Instead, it provides users with a powerful graphic showing how they approach situations and individuals in different ways. Secondly, we adapt. We adapt and modify our behaviour in response to different situations, environments and people. We adapt our behaviour to suit the situation we are confronted with. For example, you're likely to exhibit different behaviours when relaxed at home with your family compared to the behaviours you use when dealing with a challenging situation at work. PRISM shows you how you are likely to adapt your behaviour and can reveal areas of frustration or stress. Thirdly, we can change. The brain is constantly changing. This ability, called neuroplasticity, means we can all change. However, some change may be more difficult than others and require more focus. PRISM highlights our behavioural comfort zones and the potential for change. Let's move on to explore how these principles are represented on the PRISM map. This is a sample map. At first glance, it looks like there's a lot of information, and there is, so let's break it down into bite-sized chunks. The PRISM map is a schema of the brain. It is not intended, nor would it be possible, for it to be an exact model of the brain and its structure. The map represents the functional hemispheres of the brain and is deliberately simplistic. The brain is far more complex than this. The left side of the brain is represented by gold and red, and the right by green and blue. Behaviours that are created by these two sides are now commonly known as interest in neuroscience has grown dramatically in recent years. This slide, one of a series of graphics commissioned by Mercedes-Benz, sums this up nicely. The left has descriptors such as, I am a mathematician, scientist, I am accurate, analytical, practical, I play with numbers, logic and calculate. Whereas the right, I am creativity, free spirit, boundless imagination, vivid colours, I am passion. This graphic is useful because it vividly portrays the left and right and shows these as dichotomies or opposites, which is correct. But it wrongly gives the impression that we may either be left or right-brained. That is just not right. We use a range of behaviours across both sides. Knowing whether you are left or right, or more than one than the other, is interesting, but it's not particularly helpful, as it's just too broad, so we need to break this down further. PRISM breaks down the left and the right into more precise behaviours, shown as colours and dimensions. The PRISM chart is divided into 4 coloured quadrants, green, blue, red and gold, with each colour having 2 dimensions. So let's look at each colour in turn. Golds are motivated not just by results, but by quality results. They tend to be factual and extremely accurate. They are at their best when a job needs to be done with precision. Golds set high standards for themselves and others and expect everyone to comply with the same standards. Golds are highly analytical, meticulous, independent, rule-conscious and competent. They pride themselves on their ability to solve complex problems. Looking at the colours is interesting, but just looking at the colour lacks the precision required to consider the wide range of human behaviours. So PRISM breaks down each colour into 2 dimensions, each of which share the same characteristics of that colour, but also have their very own distinct differences. These behavioural differences can be compared to 2 houses designed by the same architect and built at the same time. Superficially, they appear the same, but on closer examination, whilst they have many features in common, they also have small but significant differences. The 2 gold dimensions, finishing and evaluating, share a need to be right and deliver high quality, but they do that differently. Finishing involves seeing tasks through to high quality completion. It is about paying great attention to accuracy, detail and quality. It is about having a high regard for obligations, a capacity for fulfilling promises and working to the highest ethical standards. It is intolerant of mistakes, disorganisation or casual attitudes, and is uncomfortable delegating or dealing with strangers. Evaluating is about having the ability to make sound judgments unaffected by emotional pressures. Good at analysing and evaluating lots of data, it is also about being serious-minded, questioning and detached. It displays hard-headedness and sound decision-making qualities. So having started to look at one of the colours, how do we then map a person's behavioural preferences? Taking information from the online questionnaire, the PRISM system has the capability to show 3 different maps, so we will explore these next. The underlying map is always shown as a red line. It can be described as the person's instinctive, innate behaviour. This is their behavioural comfort zone, behaviours that are natural and used instinctively. It is how this person would like to be if they had a choice. However, we don't always have the opportunity to operate within our comfort zone. We are impacted by different people, environments and demands. So, the adapted map therefore shows how this person adapts their behaviour to meet the demands of their role. The adapted map shows movement away from the person's underlying map. In essence, whether they are operating inside or outside their comfort zone. The consistent map, coloured blue, provides a summary of the person's preferences that are consistent with both their underlying and adapted maps and provides a picture of the person's consistent behaviour, the view that other people will probably have of them. The scores for each dimension and each map are shown on the right, and in simplistic terms, the closer to the outer edge of the circle, the stronger that particular preference, and the closer to the hub, the weaker the preference. We will cover these later when we look at the sample map. So let's quickly recap and link the map to the 3 key principles we looked at earlier. Firstly, when the 3 maps are displayed together, they present a dynamic graphic picture of our unique behaviour. Secondly, the map shows how we adapt our behaviour, particularly in relation to the workplace. And thirdly, it shows our capacity to change, and by looking at the extremes of the map, scores of above 75 and below 35, where change may need more focus. So let's pull all this together by working our way through the map. We've explored the gold colour and dimensions, so let's start with this. You can see the descriptors for gold in the corner, and full page descriptors are available in the accompanying PRISM report. Like all colours, gold is split into 2 dimensions, finishing and evaluating. As we have seen, finishing is about processing information and finishing to a high standard. It is about doing things right with a high level of attention to detail. The underlying, adapted and consistent lines are all close to the hub and indicate an avoided behaviour. So a coach would want to explore with the coachee when it is necessary to flex up. What situations require a higher level of finishing? How do they manage this and how does it feel? A coach would also want to explore, given this low level of attention to detail, how they spot mistakes in themselves and others. Given this is a very low preference, it would take some consistent focus to flex up, and even then probably only to the mid-range and for short periods of time. So what strategies do they employ for overcoming this behaviour when it is required more consistently and at a higher level? Moving to evaluating. Evaluating is about evaluating data and making good quality decisions. You can see from the underlying map that this is a naturally high behaviour. However, the adapted map indicates that this is not always being used at work. An important point here, PRISM shows that a gap exists, but not why a gap exists. A coach would want to explore this gap by using a question something like this. The map shows you have a high natural preference for evaluating, but you are not using all of this at work. What are your thoughts on this? The gap could be frustrating as they are not using a behaviour that is natural to them, so a coach would also be conscious of looking out for emotions triggered by this. I want to touch on these two goal dimensions in a leadership context. In a nutshell, finishing is about doing things right, whereas evaluating is about doing the right thing. Look for the trend between these two. For a leader, a higher evaluating than finishing may be more useful. Evaluating data and making decisions, not getting bogged down in the data. Let's move on and look at green. Green loves relating to and interacting with people in a positive and friendly environment. They need to express their ideas and opinions and strive towards social recognition. If they're given the opportunity to create radical ideas, they will provide unlimited possibilities. Greens are innovative, optimistic, generous, fun-loving, adventurous and flexible. If they have the freedom to be innovative and do things their way, there is no doubt they will produce ingenious results. Looking at the two green dimensions, innovating and initiating share a need to express themselves, but they achieve that very differently. Innovating is about generating imaginative solutions to problems and challenging traditional ways of doing things. This radical approach requires abstract and lateral thinking that is truly creative and not constrained by traditional limitations. It requires the ability to see possibilities, visualize outcomes, and have unlimited imagination. As a consequence, they may be forgetful and lack attention to detail. Initiating is about responding quickly to new ideas and moving them forward with energy and enthusiasm. It is about interacting with people, being articulate, and having high impact and influence. It involves displaying a high level of enthusiasm for communicating with a wide range of people and for searching out opportunities and challenges. As a consequence, they may become bored very quickly, lose concentration, and fail to follow through to completion. They also may be disorganised and careless at times. So let's explore the green quadrant dimensions. So a quick recap. Innovating is about generating innovative solutions and challenging the status quo. Initiating is about building effective relationships to initiate ideas. You can see at a glance both dimensions are at the outer edge for the underlying adapted and consistent maps, indicating natural behaviours that are being fully utilised at work. A coach would want to explore how these strong natural behaviours fit with their role at work, what they look and feel like to others, and when they need to flex down for different situations or people. At this high level, we would also consider what are known as overdone strengths. Overdone strengths are where the behaviours are used with such strength and frequency that they have the propensity to be seen in a negative way by others, particularly if the person is unaware of the need to flex their behaviour. So whilst innovating strength is about generating innovative solutions and challenging the status quo, the overdone strengths mean they may be seen by others as absent-minded, forgetful, and have an avoidance of rules and procedures. For initiating at this high level, this person may be inspirational and impactful, influential and motivational, but the overdone strengths mean they may come across as easily bored and distracted with the need to be entertaining and popular. Strengths and the impact of overdone strengths for each dimension are fully explored in all PRISM reports. Whilst considering overdone strengths, you can see in the corner of the chart that this person is much more extrovert than introvert, meaning they get their energy from being with other people rather than recharging their internal batteries on their own. The high extroversion acts as a catalyst for initiating, exaggerating some of the behaviours, So it is important to recognise that these behaviours may well be out of control, meaning this person may come across as outgoing, overbearing and gregarious, perhaps being described as the life and soul of the party. That may be fine in a social setting, but could come across as informal and unprofessional at work. A coach would want to explore this person's perception of operating at this high level and the impact it has on others. Moving on to Blue. Blues are team players who have a desire to please and maintain stability in a group, even if it means sacrificing their own personal goals. Blues are driven by harmony, agreement and loyalty. Blues are compassionate, warm, loyal, helpful, idealistic and genuine people. If they have a friendly work environment, they will be committed workers who will do their best to please those with whom they work. The two Blue dimensions, supporting and coordinating, share a need for harmony and stability, but they achieve that very differently. Supporting is about being sensitive to the individual needs and concerns of others and offering help and encouragement. It is about placing the needs of others and harmonious relationships before their own personal ambitions. It involves being unassertive and unassuming and helping to avert conflict by promoting unity, stability and harmony. They dislike being rushed and aggressive or insensitive behaviour. They tend to resist change because of the effect it has on others. In a nutshell, supporting is being sensitive to individual need and concerns. Coordinating is about encouraging individuals to work together to achieve shared objectives. It involves cultivating teamwork and making use of talented people as effectively as possible. It is about achieving consensus and placing an emphasis on collaboration in preference to a more individualistic approach. They prefer to work at a steady pace and seek compromise when making tough decisions. In a nutshell, coordinating is about supporting and coordinating a group or a team. So on to exploring the Blue Quadrant. Supporting and coordinating are both about stability, harmony and support. Supporting is more likely to be seen when working with individuals, being caring, offering support and showing empathy. Coordinating when working with or leading a team or group. Coordinating the team, promoting participation, encouraging collaboration and teamwork. Looking at the underlying map, coordinating is a natural strength and supporting is at the midpoint. The adapted maps show both are being adapted back, so the person is not using all of their natural behaviour at work. A coach would explore why this is and when they have to flex up or down. There is an important point here. Just because PRISM shows there is a gap between the underlying natural behaviour and adapted map adaptive behaviour, it doesn't mean the gap must be closed. This would need to be explored in the context of their role, the environment, the culture, and of course their career aspirations. In addition, it may be perfectly acceptable to allow a dimension to operate at a lower level to put energy elsewhere. The brain only has so much energy, so to encourage someone to inhabit new behaviours, you may need to inhibit some old ones. Blues can be quite passive, avoiding conflict and being supportive rather than challenging, so this may be at odds with the requirement to get things done, especially in a tough working environment. Which brings us on to Red. Reds like to accept challenges, create action and achieve results. They are driven to overcome opposition in order to accomplish goals. They are quick to seize opportunities that allow them to assume control of their environment. Reds are reliable, organised, practical, hard-working and focused on task. They possess a remarkable ability to thrive in difficult and demanding environments. The two Red dimensions, delivering and focusing, share a need to be in control and achieve results, but again, they do that very differently. Delivering is about meeting tight deadlines by working in a structured way. It involves being independent, having the ability to work without supervision, and being good at ensuring that things work properly. Delivering involves being self-sufficient and purposeful, as well as being concerned with realism and efficiency. They like to have the authority to make decisions, but can be frustrated when others show a lack of ability or motivation. In a nutshell, delivering is about delivering goals in a structured way. Focusing is about being so narrowly focused on personal goals or objectives that the wider picture can be lost. It is about having an inherent need to control, to achieve, and to challenge anything that stands in the way of results. It often involves being reluctant to listen to others' points of view and having a tendency to be intolerant, confrontational, or forceful. It frequently involves a lack of attention to detail and a willingness to break rules if necessary to achieve the desired results. In a nutshell, focusing is about achieving the end result at all costs. So let's explore the red quadrant. Delivering is about achieving the end result in a structured way, whereas focusing is just focusing on the end result at all costs. In terms of characters you may know, delivering is more like Richard Branson and focusing more like Donald Trump. Delivering shows a high underlying map but is adapted down to the midpoint. Explore when it is needed to operate at the higher level and how this plays out when achieving results. Focusing is an avoided behaviour naturally and at work, as all maps are below 35. Looking at the red and blue, I'd want to explore the balance between the level of challenge and support. When does this person challenge and when do they support? How do they make these decisions? And what's the impact of this? So let's recap on the whole map. Green is a real comfort zone for this person. It's a nice place for them to be and very comfortable. If you remember from the Mercedes ads, the right side is more people focused and the left more task focused. Green is on the right side, so more people focused. Couple this high green with high extroversion, the need to get energy from others, then this is a great place to be. However, this could be having an impact on the rest of the map, restricting other behaviours which we can see, and of particular interest is gold, where we can see evaluating adapted line much lower. The red delivering indicates a drive to get things done in a structured way, but the lack of evaluating at work may mean they're not focusing on the right things. Red and green are on what we call the dynamic axis, where blue and gold are on the discerning axis. This has an impact when looking at speed and decision making and their reaction to change. The dynamic axis is fast moving, fast paced, makes quick decisions and embraces change. The discerning axis is slower paced, makes considered decisions and likely wants to maintain the status quo. So there is a possible distortion here to consider. This person is more dynamic, especially on the adapted line, so fast-paced, quick decisions, likes change. We know the lack of evaluating at work may mean they're not focusing on the right things, but the enthusiasm and energy coming from the green and the high extroversion could encourage others to go along with them. So lots of stuff may get done, but is it the right stuff being done in the right way? A coach would want to explore when and if this distortion manifests itself and the impact on task, team and individual. A coach would ask the candidate to share any formal or ad hoc feedback they may have had to underpin the discussion and, if necessary, consider moving to a PRISM 360 intervention. I have to stress this is a very quick tour of the PRISM map. The map provides a whole wealth of information that can be explored with clients, and we've only just touched the surface. The full professional report also provides insights into a candidate's emotional intelligence and mental toughness, which can add further value when coaching. So I do hope this has given you food for thought. And finally, I'd like to point out that the knowledge gained from understanding PRISM maps can not only help someone's personal development, but it also gives you the opportunity to map and explore a whole team's behaviour, develop leaders and managers, and support recruitment and career development. There are a whole range of applications available to you that could really help your business in addition to individual and team coaching. Now it's time to bring Alex in. Hi Alex, great to have you here and thank you for taking time out to answer some questions on how PRISM can be a great tool for coaches. Let's begin. So, when do you use PRISM as a coach?
Hi Lisa, and great to be here and thanks for inviting me. So when do I use PRISM when I'm coaching? So initially when I'm building rapport, I think at that stage what you're trying to do is help the coachee understand themselves, but also think about how they can understand others. But of course something that's really useful is how they can begin to understand you, because you have this relationship with them. So the more they understand you, the better that can be for the coaching relationship. So what I tend to do is, after I have shared their map with them and provided some feedback, what I then do is look at my map. So I share my map with them, we look at that together. I'm looking at areas of conflict or areas where we might be too comfortable. For example, if you and the coachee are high blue, that's going to be a very supportive environment, but maybe not challenging enough. Perhaps if you're both on the left side, then that's a lot of focus on task. So maybe as a coach, you need to move the conversation around to looking at where there might need to be more focus on people. Likewise, if you are both high gold, finishing for example, then you could get stuck in detail rather than be visionary and strategic. So understanding these at the beginning together really helps you have some very productive discussions moving forward. I also think it's useful to link to a coach's goals. So I'll give you an example here. I was coaching a client recently who was overlooked for promotion to the main board. The map really helps identify areas of strengths and of course blind spots. And in this case, this person was very, very high red. So a real drive to get things done. But because this person was low initiating, there was a sort of lack of impact and influence. So people were unaware of what he was actually doing to contribute to the business. This person also had low coordinating, so wasn't really using his team as effectively as he could. So PRISM, that initial view around building rapport, certainly. Secondly, linking to a coach's goals. But bear in mind, PRISM is not a panacea for all coaching challenges, but it really helps in those initial stages and helps you link to someone's goals.
So can I ask, overdone strengths, when do they kick in and how do you avoid them having a negative impact?
So overdone strengths are generally visible when one of the lines is above 75, in particular the underlying line. So when it's close to the outer edge, over 75, then overdone strengths are likely to be visible. You need to keep an eye on where the adapted line is. So if the adapted line is lower than 75, so even if the underlying line is above 75 but the adapted line is lower, then the overdone strengths may not be evident at work, because that's giving an understanding from the map that that person's reining back those particular natural preferences. So how do you avoid overdone strengths? Firstly, by raising awareness, and secondly, by being conscious of when you need to flex that behavior down. Let me give you an example. If you are a high gold dealing with a high green, then as a gold you quite like detail, you like analysis, you like that statistical approach, but be careful when dealing with a high green because that would be too much. I'll give you an example. One of my team once produced a fairly lengthy business paper for their boss. 30 odd pages, lots of analysis, lots of detail, lots of data, lots of graphs. The boss unfortunately was high green, so all he was really interested in was the executive summary. So understand self, understand others, and flex behavior.
In the presentation, I talked about negative bias. How does the PRISM map help you see negative bias?
So negative bias is our tendency to want to pay more attention to bad things and overlook the good things that are happening. So if you look at the PRISM map, it's possible that you may see negative bias kicking in when people are working outside their comfort zone. So if you take the comfort zone as being the underlying line, any adaptation outside of that shows that someone is working outside of that comfort zone, and that may be uncomfortable to them because perhaps they're being pushed outside of their natural preference. So it could cause some anxiety or some stress, and you may see negative bias kicking in as a consequence. You may also see negative bias kicking in when people become frustrated because they're not able to work at their comfort zone. So in other words, when the adapted line is below the underlying line, people are not using their potential, they're becoming frustrated. I think you could also see negative bias when dealing with other people, because you may get an adverse reaction if you are not flexing your behavior. So if you think back to overdone strengths, If you are not capable of avoiding overdone strengths and the propensity for those to have an effect on others, then you could get an adverse reaction. And if you get an adverse reaction, that can, of course, lead to negative bias. So tune into your emotions to understand this, and of course tune into the emotions of others. So how do you feel? How are they feeling? What are you experiencing? And really be really good at understanding when you need to flex your behaviour to avoid those overdone strengths.
You mentioned tuning into emotions. What emotions does the PRISM map reveal?
So if we look at the 4 colours, each colour represents a sort of category of emotion. So if we start with red, red has this emotional need to be in charge and be competitive. Gold has an emotional need to be right and to have clarity. Blue, an emotional need for harmony and of course to be of value to others. Green has an emotional need for change and variety. So if you see those emotions becoming very clear, if you see those emotions emanating perhaps from yourself or from someone else, then you can recognize perhaps a behavior that's been underutilized. So understand the behaviors for each of the 4 quadrants, understand the emotions that can be triggered as a consequence of that, tune into those to recognize where behaviors may be underutilized.
So going back to underutilized behaviour, how can we develop behaviours?
So when it comes to developing behaviors, I think the first thing to do is recognize why you want to develop. So what is it that's causing that development need, and how does that fit with the coachee's goals? And then think about the stretch that's involved. If someone is very low on a particular preference, they're avoiding that behavior, then moving from that position will be tough. So if someone's very low, you could perhaps move them to the midpoint, but you won't ever move them to the high point. That's just a step too far. So decide first of all what you want to develop and look at the stretch involved, and then recognize that developing behavior requires focus. You do not develop behavior by throwing someone in at the deep end and hoping they will swim. All too often they won't swim and they'll end up needing rescuing. So you need a structured PDP and targeted coaching. Think also around where they may have opposite behaviours. So gold and green are dichotomies, opposites, as are red and blue. So to increase innovating, which is a green behaviour, you may need to reduce your reliance on process and procedures, which is a gold behaviour. To increase supporting, which is a blue behaviour, you may need to be less task focused, because task focused is on the red, which is on the left side. This reduction in opposite behaviour should be considered, but it also should be recognised that it's situational. So you need to explore times with the coachee when it's rational and feasible for them to do this. So don't assume that they can do that every opportunity. There will be specific times when they can make that change, depending on the situation they are confronted with. One of my favourite techniques for developing behaviours is something called critical incident awareness. And the key principle behind this is to find someone in the business who uses the behaviours you want to develop and then capture what it is that they actually do. We call these the critical instance, so that you can replicate these. The 2 methods of capturing critical instance can be by interviewing or by observation. The principle behind using someone in the business is that they are already operating and using the behaviours you want to adopt in the same environment and culture. And although it is feasible to use people outside the organisation, and of course observation can also be achieved by watching some behaviours on YouTube, TED Talks, etc., it's really key to look at how they actually adapt their behaviours to suit their environment and culture. So once mastered, critical incident awareness can help you really look at what other people do well in terms of the behaviours you want to adopt, recognise those behaviours and then begin to practice them.
The critical incident awareness technique seems to be something that would be really useful to use with leaders within business. How would you additionally coach leaders using PRISM?
Yes, indeed. Critical incident awareness is one of those key tools that a leader can pick up and use, and of course, huge advantage is it's completely self-directed. So once they understand the process, the technique, they're able to use that for a number of different behaviours. So a really, really useful technique. So, what else can you do to coach leaders? I think it's important to recognize there's probably a modular approach to this. So, firstly, cover the behaviors from the map, pull out the strengths, the blind spots, discuss where overdone strengths may be evident. So, really help them, first of all, understand their behaviors and then start to link that to understanding self, understand others, and flexing behavior. So, they have a good understanding of themselves from the PRISM map. So talk to them around how they understand behaviours in others, what they observe, and how that links to different colours and different dimensions, and when they may need to flex their behaviour. So I think that's the first approach in the module. And then the second module, I think, is to look at emotional intelligence and mental toughness. Both key areas of interest for leaders, indeed for anybody, but particularly for leaders. So that ability to understand your own emotion, understand the emotions of others, that ability to understand what you need to do when the going gets tough, that mental toughness ability. So I think those are real key aspects of leadership that can be explored. Thirdly, consideration should be given to using a 360 process, the PRISM 360 process. Up to this point, the reports, the maps you've been looking at are self-perception maps. So the PRISM 360 gives you observations from other people that can really help raise awareness, and that can be very useful for a leader. And then there are other PRISM tools you could consider bringing in and using. So leaders generally have a team, or maybe more than one team. So you could use the team diagnostic, you could use the team maps, and of course you can use PRISM leadership styles. One of the things I like to do is to create benchmarks of what good leadership looks like within the organisation. So that shows you excellence, that shows you perhaps where a leader wants to be aiming, what they are targeting. So having created the benchmark for what excellence looks like, you can then overlay the candidate against that, the leader against that, and start to think about where they need to raise certain behaviours, perhaps where they need to inhibit other behaviours. So that can be really insightful as well. So I think modular approach, in summary, think about other tools that can add value, team diagnostic, team maps, leadership styles, and benchmarks.
Thank you, Alex. That's been really helpful, and I'm afraid it's really all we've got time for on the questions and answers. So now we've come to the end of our video on the brains behind coaching. If you are interested in becoming an accredited PRISM practitioner, our exclusive online accreditation course delivers content specifically designed to maximise engagement and learning. Participants receive the full benefit of virtual technology, interactive exercises and diverse content to give them complete confidence to use the full range of PRISM tools and applications. On the completion of the online accreditation course and assessment, you can begin working immediately with the full range of PRISM tools and applications. To support the training, you'll have access to our dedicated support team and an extensive resource library of video tutorials, templates and materials. Online accreditation includes 12 chapters of self-paced learning activity, continual knowledge checks to monitor learning and retention, modular accreditation assessment, a practical one-to-one virtual feedback session and question and answers with a trained PRISM practitioner trainer, unlimited access to help and support throughout the course. For further details on our accreditation course, please follow the